Hello, I'm Eugene Dimitri, Editorial Director at Robotics 24/7, and welcome to our webcast on how to evaluate automation for e-commerce. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Covariant and Körber. Before we get into our discussion, here are a few housekeeping items. If you're having trouble hearing, please make sure that your speakers are on. If you have any questions for the panelists, please submit them in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll get to them later in this webcast. We'll get through as many as time permits, and any that we don't get to will be emailed to our speakers afterwards. Please remember to complete the survey at the end of the webcast and check out downloads in the resources box. If you're having any technical problems, press the F5 key to refresh your browser. You can also click the help icon below. A PDF of the slides will be available, and the whole roundtable will be available on demand after this broadcast. While the holiday rush is upon us, many e-commerce and retail operations are looking ahead to adopting or adding automation. But first, they need to understand the potential benefits and limitations of different robots and software for their environments. Whether you're just getting started with robotics or are looking to scale your fleet, our expert panelists will review key considerations. I'd like to welcome our speakers for today's webcast, Saha, Head of Product Marketing at Covariant, and John Santagate, Vice President of Robotics at Körber Supply Chain. Welcome, gentlemen. Anu, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. Let me share some slides. What I want to do is take a few moments to give you a little bit of a background on Covariant, who we are as a company, and the solutions that we provide to the warehousing and logistics space. Just as a quick background, we were founded by 4 researchers who really got their start in the AI research world. They're considered pioneers. They essentially invented a lot of the techniques in AI that's used today. And what they found out is, as they looked for, what problems they could solve using that AI technology, they found that the warehousing space is uniquely suited for AI because you have wide variability in SKUs, you have fast-changing SKU items, you have performance, all these things where basically AI is really well suited to solve. So our founder's vision was really to kind of go out there and build solutions that we can use to help warehouses and 3PLs solve logistics challenges. So on the right, you'll see a smattering of some of our customers that we have, along with partners like Canap, AVP, MHAS, Bastion, and Dematic. What we see kind of around warehouses in the world are a number of solutions that we have been powering using our AI platform that I want to talk about in a second. And the common thing that we found across the board with warehouses and fulfillment centers is that you really have challenges across 2 dimensions that you want to solve. One is around just the complexity of the items and that you face that I mentioned earlier, right? The SKU shape, sizes, and so forth. And on top of that, you have kind of a seasonal changeover of those items. So that's one kind of dimension you have to handle with robotics. The second dimension that you have to handle with robotics is around just meeting the throughput and accuracy that you need for it to be financially viable. Right? Humans do an excellent job at that, where they can perform pick-and-place operations in a warehouse at a fairly good speed, fairly high accuracy. And so in our view, a robotic system needs to match both of these dimensions. And so that's where we come in with our Covariant brain. It's essentially, think about the brain as quite literally kind of the brain that sits behind the robot that enables robots to see, think, and act, right? To be able to see the world in front of them, be able to figure out how to make decisions and pick up objects, and then be able to pick up items and complete the action of placing them in the destination of fast air movement. And the second aspect of it is kind of building solutions that are kind of designed to fully maximize the benefits of AI, right? And the kind of solutions that we see out there that we have been building for our customers apply to customers who could be anywhere kind of along the journey of automation. They might have kind of manual picking processes today, right, where they're batch picking. They might have manual sorting with like a put wall or a put to light system, or they might have automated sorting, or all the way up to goods to person systems. What we have found is that for each of these cases, there is still an opportunity where AI-powered robots can help automate their processes further. And by and large, kind of the biggest use cases that we see out there are around goods to person picking. So, converting that to a goods to robot station, right? So picking out of a goods to person system. Induction is a really big use case, right? So inducting items onto unit sorters, pocket sorters, AMRs, T sorts, and those things. Order sortation. So, there are quite a few operations that do batch picking operations, so sorting those orders out. Turns out our order sortation system is also really well suited for returns processing, right? Mixed SKU depalletization, kitting, co-packing. So just some of the key use cases. And quickly, I want to show you some of the examples that we have out there. This is a client I'm actually visiting right now. This is Capacity. They're health and beauty direct-to-consumer 3PL. And so they service some pretty high-value brands out there. And so they have deployed a number of our put wall stations to help with their operations, to help kind of address some of the labor challenges that you see throughout the industry. Same thing with another client, Radial. Right? They have 12 stations that are running today with our U-shaped put wall. Again, kind of sorting out orders from batch pick operations. This is one of our earliest clients, Obeda. It's a client in Germany, and they're electrical goods wholesaler, and they have a KNAPP shuttle system, a goods to person system, and so we're picking items out of that directly into one of 4 destination order boxes. And the last example I'll share is McKesson. They're the largest kind of pharma distributor in the U.S., and they also have a KNAPP system for goods to person, and what they have is KNAPP's Pick It Easy robot that's powered by our AI that picks out of that system into the destinations. So just wanted to kind of show you some examples of AI robotics. You'll hear a lot about robotic piece picking and so forth. And what we've been very excited is just to see the number of customers that we have who are using this today and have been using it for years, deployed in the real world. So with that, I will pass it. Actually, let me just kind of provide a destination. If you want to learn more, please visit covariant.ai/solutions to learn more about our products and technologies and how they can help you in your operations. So with that, I'll pass it back to you.
All right, thank you, Anu. And now I'll introduce John Santagate, Körber Supply Chain. Hey, John.
Thank you, Eugene. Thanks, Eugene. Great presentation, Anu. That was certainly quite interesting, and I think where we're at with robotics, especially in the retail and e-commerce space, a big chunk of that is artificial intelligence and machine learning that's enabling these robots to sense, respond, and act in the way that we need them to add value for the organizations that we're looking to support and help. Real quickly, I'm John Santagate. I'm the Vice President of Robotics and Voice Solutions at Körber Supply Chain. I've been involved in researching this industry for roughly 4 years before going into the market as a lead for the go-to-market strategy here for Körber. I've been covering this space as it's quite an interesting space since 2015, and looking at the applications of robotics into various industries, but clearly, especially as it relates to mobile robotics, a heavy emphasis has been placed on retail and e-commerce in order to support, as Anu pointed out, the labor-related challenges and the growth that we've been experiencing over the past several years in those industries. So let's see here. So what I'll do now is just progress a little bit through some content here around how we at Körber Supply Chain see the market, where we participate in the market, and then we'll jump back to Eugene for the panel component of the webinar here today. So, as Körber Supply Chain, we're a participant in the end-to-end supply chain execution space, right? And so part of the reason we focus on the execution component is largely due to the complexity that we've seen, emerge and grow relative to the way in which goods are moved through the supply chain. Every organization that we see today, especially in the retail space, is participating across borders, is experiencing rapid growth, strong demand, and is feeling the pressure to do more with less, right? And so when we look at what's going on in the market, we look at it through the lens of complexity and how can we as a solution and service provider help organizations overcome the various aspects of complexity that exist within the supply chain. And we do see the challenges related to today's market that are driving organizations to make investments in digitization, to look for modern technologies that will allow them to do more with less. We do find the vast majority of warehouses today are still relying on manual execution. I saw a report recently that it was over 40% of warehouse operators are leveraging robotics in some capacity, yet we still see that less than 8% of North American warehouses are leveraging this technology, which I think to me means that there's a lot of today exposure to the technology, but it still hasn't been mass adopted across facilities. And when we look at the way in which robotics today can help solve these challenges, the low-hanging fruit is a lot of that resides in movement of material, right? You've got folks pushing carts and people pulling pallet jacks and driving fork vehicles. But then you compound that with the fact that it's very hard to find labor in these environments, and there's a revolving door of people. And so we're seeing, the impact of high employee turnover in the warehouses, low labor availability, and the increasing cost of warehouse-related labor, really just putting strain on organizations and, pushing them to look to, automation as a resolution to the labor constraints. And so how does Körber participate in this space? Well, as I mentioned, we're an end-to-end supplier of warehouse execution technologies. We were born out of the acquisition of over 13 different companies that participated in the supply chain space. Companies like HighJump, WMS from HighJump's software, several integration companies, some European automation companies such as Langhammer and Aberla. And we put these organizations together under the Körber Foundation in order to build a supply chain execution organization that has the broad base of technology solutions. In our bag today, we focus on supply chain modeling with simulation, gamification embedded into our applications in order to drive labor in creative ways to do more. We have a robust suite of WMS applications. Transportation management, warehouse control systems. We are the world leading supplier of voice-directed picking applications. And the group that I'm responsible for is our mobile robotics practice, where we don't manufacture the robots, but what we do is partner with leading suppliers to design, deploy, deliver, and support mobile robotic applications for our customers. And then again, we look through our suite of technologies across the broad application. It's not just about the solution itself. It's about the availability of the data, what you can do to analyze that data to find opportunities to drive further value propositions for the operation itself. And that's another area where, most organizations that participate in the supply chain technology space are leveraging tools like artificial intelligence, right? It's a broad category that touches a lot of areas. And when you can, dissect, the end-to-end data of a warehouse operation and leverage tools such as AI and machine learning to find patterns that might not readily be available, you can turn those patterns into opportunity recognition and then create strategies that allow you to go out there and drive further improvements. And that's a big part of, how we look at the value proposition of the solution suite that we provide, that goes from everything from inbound into the facility, the execution of the solutions within the facility, to managing the transportation and the full material flow throughout the supply chain. And so, and we do that with a lens of various perspectives. when we look at the current state of the market, we want to ensure that we're delivering supply chains that enable sustainability, moving materials in the most optimal fashion to have the lowest impact on the environment, as an example. We're highly focused on the user experience, right? I think that's been a hot topic recently in terms of allowing the customers to have a singular experience regardless of how they interact with your organization, and we leverage our supply chain applications to help that. Labor engagement is obviously a significant factor here. We want to ensure that the folks that we're working with aren't able to just do more with less and get more productivity out of their employees, but that those employees are happy to be there, are fully engaged in the operation, and we're making the working experience more pleasant. The part where I spend a lot of my time is on the facilities optimization, right? What is the best path to move material from inbound to outbound and every step in between? And then obviously we do that all through the lens of digitization, as we are a digitally enabled, software-driven organization. And we do focus on agility and resiliency, meaning allowing organizations to grow and scale in a way that allows them to adapt to market changes. And we do see robotics being a key element in that aspect, especially when you talk about overcoming labor availability. Go back to the pandemic and the fact that people were asked to stay home for 2 years, yet all those people that were home were ordering products via online channels, and so you had to have some way to get the stuff out of the warehouse onto the trucks into the hands of the customers. And so that's a lot of where we spend our time, is helping our organizations understand how to adapt and respond to circumstances just as that. And so for more information, please feel free to reach out to me. I can be reached at john.santagate@Körber-supplychain.com. And we do have an abundance of useful content. As you see on the right there, a case study for a customer of ours where we deployed a robotic system with almost 2,000 racks, 122 robots, and we've just increased it from 7 picking modules to 9 picking modules that allowed this organization to consolidate their fulfillment operation from multiple 3PL organizations into its own operation, managed under its own roof. We'd be happy to talk about that operation itself as well. And with that, I'll pass the baton back to you, Eugene.
Thanks, John. And a quick reminder to those of you watching, remember to check out the resources and the feedback survey, and don't hesitate to submit questions at any time during this conversation. We will get to them shortly. But John and Anu, we've heard all about supply chain challenges and labor shortages in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, but there's often the response that robotics and AI can add flexibility and resilience. What does that mean? Because it sounds like a lot of buzzwords, but I think both of you mentioned that you've got case studies where your customers are actually getting those benefits. Anu, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think everyone's obviously aware of the labor challenges that have existed, and with robotics, one of the key things that our customers see is just being able to have labor that they know they can scale up to when needed, right? That's one of the things is you have peak season coming in, right? Do you then kind of use your robots or use robotic automation as part of your base labor, and then you can scale up the people side of labor as needed, or vice versa, right? So I think there are a number of strategies you can think about, but what we've seen is just the whiplash that a lot of kind of logistics providers face when there's demand spikes and dips. It helps ease that quite a bit, right? And so I'd say to think about it, it's not that it's a kind of solves all labor problems, but it helps kind of build up some of that resiliency, kind of takes some of that spikiness out of your curves, of your labor demand curves.
And John, what have you seen in terms of that want to have more robust supply chains after all the challenges that we've had?
Yeah, well, I think when I think there's two different elements of the question, right? You mentioned flexibility and resilience. Can be related, but are two separate topics, I think. When I look at flexibility, that can mean an abundance of things, right? Does it give you the flexibility to enhance your SKU mix and bring in new products, right? Is the operation capable of, rapidly adapting to customer demand variations? Maybe not just seasonal changes, but perhaps just massive changes or swings in demand in general, right? You want to have today's supply chains need to be flexible enough to be able to adapt to rapid change. And that means, having the processes and tools in place that allow you to do things differently, to handle a wider variety of products and a wider variety of SKUs with different configurations and things of that nature. But to Anu's point, it also means having the flexibility to adapt your workforce, right? There's a lot of organizations today that we see that, may have a seasonal speak around the holiday periods. We're coming into that. And how do you flex up your workforce in an efficient way to move the goods out of the facility into the hands of your customer? But we do see more and more organizations that have weekly spikes, right? You see there's a lot today of, we'll call it Fashion Friday circumstances, where an organization had a heavy drop of new products one day a week, and 80% of their shipping happens on 2 days a week, but they've still got to maintain the operation Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and be able to flex up to support that big burst on Friday, Saturday, right? So there's a lot of elements that go into that. And then when I think about resilience, again, going back to the ability to overcome the challenges that are unforeseen, right? No one would have foresaw a tanker getting stuck in the Suez Canal a couple of years ago, right? That held up everything. And there were some organizations that were better positioned, inventory spread out more diversely, looking at alternative trade routes and things of that nature. And when we think about the supply chain, the number one constant is change, right? Is disruption. And how do you, design a supply chain strategy and tool set that allows you to adapt rapidly to unforeseen circumstances?
I think that's a really good point, John. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Anu.
Oh, I was going to say, that's a really good point. I mean, right now, in the U.S., the Mississippi is low, so you have problem there with barges not being able to get through. But what's, something that we talk about a lot is that instead of kind of building bigger and bigger warehouses as demand spikes up, how do you instead make your warehouses more efficient? How do you build better warehouses, right? Because, that upturn that you're seeing during COVID, at some point that was going to come down. And then now you're stuck with a lot of extra capacity. Of course, now we're saying that you cannot have enough capacity because there's an overabundance of supply. So, like you said, change is constant, right? It's going to keep going up and down, and it's just the strategy you should have is how do you build your logistics processes to be able to adapt to those changes, right? Whether it's a mix, change in product SKUs, change in business model. You might go from a seasonal fashion cycle to a weekly or a monthly subscription cycle, right? Can your operations adjust to that? So I think that's the key to it, right? What are you investing in from a people, process, and technology standpoint that helps you, if not solve, but at least be able to address those a little bit better than you could have in the past?
Absolutely.
And speaking of investing in automation, I know you had mentioned that we are in a period where capital can be constrained, right? And there's this urgency of adoption, but at the same time, it can be a little intimidating given the level of outlay. How can companies invest in robotics and AI and automation right now? And how do models like robotics as a service or RaaS, how do those help?
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more RaaS type of models, which stands for Robotics as a Service, right? It's essentially a subscription service. And we're also seeing kind of a mix of both, where you have part of it is part of your payment is kind of a more traditional CapEx model, right? And then part of it is a subscription model. I think all of those are viable options. You just need to look at your how your funding looks, how your budgeting looks, right? A lot of times, unless you have budgeted out a year or two in advance, it's really hard to come by large capital expenditures, because you have to go through pretty rigorous approval processes. And so that's where a subscription-based or a RaaS model just makes it a lot easier from an investment standpoint. And of course, you have a mixed model as well, which I think is perfect as well for many organizations where they want to use some of their CapEx, but they also want to have a subscription model. But besides just the payment model, one of the things that we ask our customers to look at is your vendor focused on performance, right? Are they focused on driving throughput and delivering value to you, or are they like a technology vendor who's dropping something off at your doorstep and then you bought it, you own it, and now you're stuck with it, kind of a thing, right? Because we've seen that too. We've seen, we've walked into warehouses where there'll be a previous robotic system that's sitting in the corner collecting dust, and we have to kind of overcome that bitter taste. But they see us coming in with kind of we put performance at the center of our relationship, and that's what you should look for in a vendor. Is somebody who can drive and promise that performance to you and throughput to you, and that follows all the way through to your commercial relationship with them, right? Whether it's a CapEx-based relationship, or it's a performance-based or a mixed model of RaaS and CapEx.
And John, I know Körber is all about services, so.
Yeah, I think there's a great point there. There's a couple of things to discuss relative to RaaS versus CapEx, but you would pull out something very interesting there and new is that, when you're engaged in a robot as a service model, you've got to create the stickiness of the customer. They have the opportunity to, push you out the door if you're not providing that added level of service. If your solution is not meeting the level of expectation that it's supposed to, there's very little holding them in the door because they haven't made that capital investment, and it's incumbent on the supplier to ensure the success of the deployment. And obviously a part of that robot as a service is ongoing maintenance and support to ensure you've got a fully functioning solution. But your point is absolutely correct. Even with the CapEx deployments, you don't want to have someone that's a vendor. You want to have someone that's a partner. Right. You don't want to have someone that, as to your point, Anu, is going to, deploy it, train up your folks, and then leave and never call you back. Right. Because as we've seen, every customer that we've worked with has continued to scale, has continued to look at new ways to deploy this technology. And, you need to have a partner that's there to help you as a customer think holistically about the operation. Right. You came in here to solve this problem. You've helped there. Can we make it better? Where else can we use these technologies to improve our operation? And really, that's at the crux of what we do at Körber Supply Chain as a integrator, service provider, and provider of software, is focus on ensuring that there's ongoing customer success when we go and deploy our solutions for these customers, or the third-party solutions that we deploy. One other thing about the RaaS model that I particularly like quite a bit is enabling that flexibility and scalability that we talked about earlier. Right, with that sort of a system, or the hybrid systems, right? Can you buy a system for your operation and have the opportunity to short-term rent additional capacity? We see that available with the full-on RaaS suppliers as well, where you deploy a system, but embedded in that system is the option to scale up for peak, for short bursts of activity, to increase your capacity and reduce the amount of manual labor that you have to bring in. And the key point there is reduce, not eliminate, because, as Anu, I'm sure you'd agree, the warehouses are not run by equipment. They're run by the people that are there. We're just trying to make those people more efficient. And when you have to scale up for peak, you can't achieve that just by adding technology. You have to add people to the mix. It's about finding that balance of how do I get the best performance out of the most efficient pool of labor by applying modern technology that is offered as a service that allows us to scale. And, bringing in the right partners that help you figure all that out.
Yeah, and I know, obviously, we've been talking about robotics as a service and software as a service, but are there, over the past year, obviously, things keep changing, as you both noted, but are there particular technologies that are in really high demand where you're getting a lot of questions from customers?
I guess I'll kick that piece off, Eugene. Obviously, there's tremendous demand. If it's anything that starts with an R and ends in robotics, there's tremendous interest in there, and I say interest because not all interest turns into demand, right? There's a lot of interest in understanding the opportunity, the potential, but there's also a lot that goes into developing the value proposition, right? And just because company A is interested, it's incumbent upon us as a supplier to, at times, qualify out an opportunity, right? Customer says, "Hey, we really want robots," and I've had to do this myself, on multiple occasions. We really want mobile robots. What can you do? And you get in there and you get the data, and it's, you don't have enough volume that's going to support a good, solid ROI with robots. But here's what else we can offer, right? We can bring in voice that's going to, have a measurable ROI in a short period of time that you wouldn't achieve with robotics. We're also seeing still increasing demand for voice technologies. I think there's room for all of these different sort of fulfillment capabilities. It's just about finding the right application by which to deploy them. And we hear a lot, Eugene, believe it or not, about gamification, right? There's a lot of activity and interest around how do we deploy within our solution suite incentives that make the associates want to do more, want to improve productivity. Is there an award structure that's attached to it? And a lot of that's built on visibility. But we, again, when we're hearing customers, it's not about, more often, it may be, we want robotics, but it's why, right? At the end of it, it's solutions that improve productivity and efficiency within the facility.
Yeah, I'd say that's the exact same thing. It's not necessarily that. There are a lot of customers that are interested in robotics, but at the end of the day, if you think about automation that you see in most warehouses that you walk in, from our perspective, we've done a really good job of kind of solving in automating the feet. Right, so basically walking, right, carrying goods from one end of the warehouse to another, and I think AMRs have kind of totally taken that to the next level as it comes to kind of automation of the feet. Where we have seen the biggest opportunity and promise is there we focus on, which is automating the hands. Right, it's like you have these conveyors and AMRs go to a point where then you have a human have to pick up the item and place it down because it turns out it's actually quite a challenging thing to go. Solve with robotics, at least with traditional robotics, right? And so when they see what's possible now it just unlocks this whole new level of efficiency that was previously kind of unlocked and unrealized, right? It's again, great job at automating the feet, and now I think the manual automation and in pick and place operations, it's been really, really a really good conversation that we've had lots of clients.
Well, and we've seen this evolution from traditional retail, then e-commerce, and now to omni-channel. John, you had mentioned before, multi-channel versus omni-channel, and what does that mean in terms of automation? Because those processes, we're talking now the entire system, not just an individual solution, but all of them aren't connected.
Yeah, I think we had this conversation just the other day, right, Eugene? When you're talking omni-channel and multi-channel, I think most, not all, but most organizations today that categorize themselves as omni-channel or multi-channel, right? You order from the online channel and you get a product that's from the online DC, that's from the e-commerce fulfillment center that doesn't necessarily have an alignment to on-shelf available inventory, as an example. When you're talking multi-channel, it's a little bit easier. You can create strategies for, ship from shelf, click and collect, e-commerce, and then retail fulfillment. And each one may have its own set of demand characteristics that allow you to automate in an optimized way. When you think about omni-channel, you can still do some of the same things, but you have to have a much tighter degree of data alignment. You have to be able, there's a lot more intelligence that goes into saying, Mr. Customer ordered from this zip code. I've got inventory at these 13 stores in this one DC, right? What's the on-shelf availability for the next 7 days at each shelf? What's the shortest distance to ship that product to that customer? Is it going through an automation solution or is it a manual pick and things of that nature? I think we're still at a stage where there's a lot of opportunity to really realize the promise of omni-channel fulfillment, which means being able to fulfill from any location to any customer based on the optimized use of that piece of inventory and the optimized fulfillment methodology, right? That means being able to look at your on-shelf available inventory at all of your stores in the area, potentially, and say, this particular store has an excess of inventory that we don't think we're going to sell through by the time we get our next shipment in. So let's ship that piece of inventory, even though it's not the shortest distance to the customer, as an example. And that, that lends itself to that sort of hybrid that you were talking about, Anu, where there's automation in certain components, there's manual interaction in other components. And quite frankly, in the retail and e-commerce space, that's how it will continue to be, because there are certain, there's certain products that aren't well fit for automation. There's other products that are. There's certain fulfillment channels that aren't a great fit for it. And then there's environments that, can run perfectly fine manually today that will evolve over time. But there's low incentive to make a change and make the investment into automation today. It's about, again, I'll go back to that statement I made a few minutes ago of finding the balance and making sure that the available investment dollars are going into the right areas, right? Investing in the right technologies for the various workflows that would exist within the network.
And Anu, what's your thought on multi-channel and omni-channel commerce? Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, most of the warehouses that I've walked into, they also do call themselves omni and multi-channel, but a lot of them end up just being segregated by space. They'll have the retail replenishment space that's part of the warehouse, online versus whatnot. And so, I haven't seen a really good, fully integrated system yet. Which does what John is talking about. I'm sure a number of Körber's clients are getting there. But I think, again, it's really important to adopt a strategy that lets you adapt and change over time, right? Like today, you might have a certain amount of e-commerce that requires 2-day shipment, right? But next year, that delivery time, it's only going to get shorter. So how is your operations going to change? As operations move to micro-fulfillment, what does that mean for you? So all of that to say, again, is like thinking about not just the needs you have of today based on the past few years, but rather, how can you build a flexible enough system going forward that you're not tied down to certain technologies, that you're not building these giant warehouses, and instead thinking about how do I adopt technologies that will grow with me and change with my business, right? If you look at our the AI that powers our robots, we call it the covariant brain that I mentioned when I was showing my slides. That today you might have a fairly manual operation of batch picking, right? And you can use one of our robotic put walls that's powered by the covariant brain to help pick and sort items. Next year, you might have an auto store keep sort system. It turns out that the same covariant brain that you're using for this application today is going to be the same one that powers your goods-to-person picking system tomorrow, right? So, this is a really good example of kind of, you're investing in the covariant brain. This is AI that learns from your operations and keeps growing. It learns from all of the connected robots, not only in all of your warehouses, but around the world. And as it gets better, next year when you have new needs, like you want to add robotic depalletization, well, guess what? The same covariant brain, the same AI is going to power those applications, right? And so that's a really good example of how, investing in technologies that can help you scale and adapt in the future is really important as your operations change from, having segregated channels to omni-channel to having truly multi-channel operations.
And I think you got to an interesting point because you've seen the evolution from, goods to person, and now with automated storage and retrieval systems, or ASRS, goods to robot systems even. And we talked a lot about the robotics angle, but there's also the element of the managing of robots and people and these multiple systems as they evolve. And can you talk a little bit about how, because you mentioned the covariant brain, obviously being this AI that drives it, but how do you approach managing those different elements in a particular warehouse or a particular e-commerce facility?
Yeah. So when it comes to deploying robotic systems in your warehouse, one of the things that we pay a lot of attention to is that we fit into your current operations and processes, not only your materials handling work upstream and downstream workflow, but also any other kind of monitoring and control systems you're using, right? So, what dashboards are you using? What's your WCS and control tower strategy? And building into that. And the way our philosophy is that a robotic station should be really treated no different than a human station, right? There shouldn't be a caveat that, oh, this is a robotic station, so therefore it's allowed to perform worse or be down, more hours a day than the human station, right? You should hold it to the same standard, if not better. And so integrating into your existing kind of reporting and dashboarding structure is really important, right? So having that point of view, but then being able to dive into it and see, if there's anything wrong with it, being able to troubleshoot and so forth. The other aspect of it is what we find is that you really want to get to a point where your robotic system requires as few human kind of bot tenders, as we call them, as possible, right? Because otherwise the economics just start breaking down. And so you want to get to a point where it's a 5-to-1 or 10-to-1 ratio of robot stations to a human who has to intervene, right? There might be something that comes up that someone needs to go help with. And so that's where, I think that's where the economics really lies, right? Is that if you can't get that right and you can't get the performance, throughput, and accuracy right, then it's not going to be a scalable model. And so those are some of the things that we pay attention to.
And Sean, how does Körber look at that software management, or you've got multiple elements between different robots, people on the floor, and as you mentioned earlier, the data that is constantly being collected?
Well, right. I think the historical way to do that is, silos, right? You've got your WMS, your labor management, your shipping application, all of your different, data elements just in their own operational environment, somehow integrated to the WMS overall, but by and large, data management has historically been silo-based, which allows you to optimize in pockets. But I think we all know when you optimize one thing, there's an equal and opposite reaction somewhere upstream or downstream, right? And how do you find balance across the two elements? So one thing that we're doing at Körber Supply Chain, we've recently announced the first version of our unified control system, which is designed in a way to address some of those challenges. This tool that we've been working on, and we'll have, we've done our first initial deployments here in Europe, is designed to almost be a middleware between the WMS and the execution floor. So you can think of it as something that allows you to create a singular data interface with a common data layer to the WMS, and that would be your integration point to all your other management applications and provide you with your dashboards, your data analytics, your ability to push work across the different areas of the warehouse with the intelligence to understand that piece of work A is going over to this goods to person system, so it goes into the black box that optimizes it. It comes back. All I need is a message that it was picked. We'll move it to the next process and send that information back to the WMS. And then piece of work B goes over to a point-to-point mobile robotic system that needs to have the path optimized for it. And the UCS would then do those calculations and become the robot orchestration engine as well. And so we're actively engaging in the effort to create a end-to-end data-driven alignment for all applications relative to warehouse execution. The way we view it is, the more you can create a common thread from inbound to outbound and all steps in between, the better the opportunity you have to truly optimize a facility and all of the workflows that go on within the four walls of that building.
And I think that's, the ability to have that visibility, I guess, that was not previously available is really something important. I know I'm just looking, we have a lot of reader questions or audience questions, so I'm going to move to those. But again, all of you who are watching this, remember to submit your questions, and any that we don't get to, we'll make sure that the speakers have a chance. One of the things that you mentioned is, obviously we're looking at humans and robots, but one question here is, with the adoption of robot arms, AMRs, and ASRSs on the rise, where do you see humanoid robots fitting into the equation? Because there's been a lot of buzz around that, and is that something that retail and e-commerce should really be evaluating at this point, or is it something that's still exciting but maybe further down the road? John.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you've heard me say this, Eugene, just because you can automate something doesn't mean that you should, right? There's got to be a viable business case behind making the investment in this technology. And quite frankly, the humanoid robots, while very neat, do come with a much higher price tag than a mobile robot itself. There's a higher degree of, gyroscopic motion, balance, more articulation, different types of sensors and things of that nature. That said, there certainly are workflows that are appropriate in retail and e-com. If you think about one of the challenges that we hear often from customers is, we want to automate the offloading of vehicles, right? We have X number of, floor load containers coming on a daily basis that we then have to unpack, palletize, and so on and so forth. And how's that done today? Well, people go in there, they lift the packages up, they put them on a conveyor, or they walk them out of the truck and put them on a pallet. If you've got a palletization system, you can throw them on a conveyor that would then sort them through so that you're creating pallets of like product, as an example. But I think that's a really interesting use case if you can use technology to perform that function. It's mundane, it's tedious, it's boring, it's not ergonomically pleasant at times when you have to reach down for certain things. And so, I think that's a particularly valid use case for that sort of technology. I'm sure that there's plenty others. If we were to, peel back the layers of the onion and really look at what those things can do, I will say, having seen the Atlas do a backflip, I don't necessarily think that they're in it for gymnastics. But the hands and the feet and the movement are a little bit more dynamic. You can get a little bit creative, I think. But again, the point would be, where does it make sense for the operation? What's your annual budget, for example, on offloading those vehicles? Does it make sense to buy a $1 million robot for that problem?
Right. And Anu, what do you think of the idea of humanoids as part of the mix?
I think, similar to what John said, just because it can be automated, it shouldn't be. My take on that is sometimes it's really cool technology to see stuff like that. But often it's interesting technology looking for a problem to solve, and not the easiest way to solve that problem necessarily, right? So I think, look, at the end of the day, humanoid robots, they make the news, right? They're like autonomous vehicles, right? They just make the news. Everybody picks up on that. All of your technical pubs and your consumer pubs will pick up on those stories, and so that's why it's good. It's good press. So I don't blame that at all. But I think ultimately, though, what you should be looking for is, what is the specific problem we're wanting to solve, and what is the best way to go solve it, versus I'm going to try to go build a human alternative and see what problems we can solve, right? And I think, depending on which way you come, you reach a more practical and scalable solution faster. And I'm sure there are use cases that, humanoid form factor will make sense. Other cases, they just don't, right? A robotic arm or an AMR is perfectly well suited because it is designed to solve a very specific problem, and it does well.
And John, I think you were going to say something. I think that the specificity is really where robots shine, right? That they can be better than humans, but at a very narrow set of tasks. And then trying to do this general purpose automation, while it is an exciting technical challenge, doesn't necessarily help retailers right now when they just need to worry about throughput and understanding the pain points within their processes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Anu hit the nail on the head, right? At least initially, it was building something really neat and trying to figure out what to do with it, right? And in warehouse technology, there's an abundance of problems that need to be solved that need point-driven solutions. Now that said, I do think that the humanoid robots that we'll see more moving forward. There's significant investment being made into that space. I think more importantly, if you look at the impact that the R&D into that space has had on the broader space, right? Similar to what autonomous driving cars did for autonomous mobile robots, right? The technology is developed for purpose A and then it's translatable to purpose B, and purpose B may have a more viable use case in the near term. I see a lot of that coming out of that, the technology development that's been done in the humanoid robotic space.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think they become really good test beds for proving out new technology, right? If you look at some of the work that one of our founders, Peter Abeel, did in his research days was how to teach a robot how to walk. And what he came up from that is this idea of deep reinforcement learning in AI, right? That's used to train robotic arms, and not necessarily to train humanoid robots to walk. Sorry, Gene.
No, moving on to another technology. John, I think you mentioned before in multi-channel the idea of automated lockers and pick up at store, but there's the whole notion of micro-fulfillment, right? Getting the supply chain closer to the customer and then automating that on a perhaps a different scale than those giant DCs and warehouses at the edge of metropolitan areas. But we have an audience question here. What factors are limiting micro-fulfillment adoption?
I don't know about adoption. Limiting adoption. I think it's just network optimization studies that are pushing some organizations to go into it and others not to. You can go back to 2016, when my IDC days. I wrote a report on the growth of the micro fulfillment network and how to execute to that model, right? Because the creme de la creme is to have the right product in the right place at the right time. That does not mean a 2 million square foot facility in the middle of America that you can reach anywhere in 3-4 days. Today, you have to have certain products in available same day delivery, right? Not all, but certain products. And I think that falls into the category of enabling omni-channel fulfillment, right? Using the backup store that historically would have been for bulk storage for shelf replenishment as available to ship as active inventory, and turning that into a micro fulfillment center. And we are seeing that occur. We're seeing a lot of that in grocery. And I think we'll continue to see that, especially in the retail space, as it becomes more cost effective. And we're also seeing this idea of like the Uberization of services, right? When do we get to I ordered something from Walmart, it shipped from the back of that store, the Uber driver picked it up on his way to pick up his next passenger and dropped it off at my door. We're not very far away from that at scale, right? That the mechanisms are there, the platforms are there. I think the demand is there. We just need to see more of it and be more vocal about those as an options, and see more retailers embrace the idea that you can make better use of your inventory rather than waiting for someone to walk in your store, to have it available to send to them in a cost-effective manner.
Yeah, and Anu, are you seeing that micro-fulfillment as a phenomenon? Is that something that you think is happening rapidly?
Yeah, I think during the pandemic it took off, right? You had companies like GoPuff, they just went huge. But then, of course, they also had a downturn as a company. So I think you're going to continue to see. I think we're still trying to figure out where we land. Like, we're still trying to reach the stabilizing point with micro fulfillment, because it depends on the vertical, right? In some cases, you have retail space, a back of retail that is underutilized, and so using that for local fulfillment, you're going to continue to see more of that, right? Because that just makes sense. So instead of having a hub model, you have a hub and spoke model. And with all the spoke endpoints being all the retail stores that they've already invested in. So I think you're going to continue to see that. I think on the grocery side, I think the jury's still out, honestly, on where we're going to land, because now with the pandemic largely being considered over, people started going back to stores, especially for grocery shopping. And so companies that had spun up a lot of infrastructure around micro-fulfillment of groceries got hurt a little bit, right? Again, it goes back to my original point. Don't just build more and more warehouses, make the resources you have right now more efficient, right? Take the retail space you have right now and make it more efficient versus building larger and larger warehouses. And so, that's I think something we're going to continue to see is just the right sizing of that over time.
And you both mentioned, obviously, the need for efficiency, but we have an audience question here about, is it throughput, is it ROI, or time to payback? How do you approximate the budget? When you're evaluating all these different systems, how should a retailer or e-commerce provider, how should they prioritize those things? Because they're going to hear a lot of competing claims, right? And John, you mentioned end-to-end automation early on. What should they realistically be looking at first? John?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I think first is productivity, or essentially, let me step that back. What's important to them? What is the challenge that they need to solve, right? Because when you look at warehouse fulfillment technologies, we'll just go with mobile robotics as a surrogate here for broad adoption. There's problems that they solve that aren't just productivity related, right? Productivity is the biggest driver today, and that's going to give you your ROI. So yes, you need to look at, what sort of labor related value can you gain from the deployment of this technology? But for some companies, it's quality, right? Quality meaning accuracy of picks. We've got 20% of our outbound packages have an error. Well, what can we do to resolve that? Can we use robots that provide a visual indicator, that provide a lighting system to make sure you put it in the right location so that the right product goes to the right customer, right? That's something that we're seeing these things solve. And then more importantly, I hear it more and more is the idea of operational continuity, right? We've got growing demand. We've got to move product out to our customers so that we can keep those customers, and we can't get people into the facility to move the goods. Operational continuity. Even if I just break even, it's worth making the investment. Now, that's not every customer. By and large, there's still the ROI component. We need to get a payback period. And that is oftentimes driven by productivity improvements that allow the organization to move more goods out the door with fewer humans touching the products to get it out the door.
And Anu?
Yeah, I mean, everything John said, spot on, right? I wouldn't change any of that. I think one of the things that I think folks often forget to include in these calculations is the cost of replacing labor, right? Because of the high turnover rate. What is the cost, the kind of your fully loaded cost of recruiting, training, retaining labor, and then they're going to roll off in 3 months and you got to hire someone else. And that's huge organizationally, right? So that's one side of it. And the other side of it is even that model assumes that you can find labor, right? And I think that we've seen that is not the right assumption to make, because to find that labor, you're having to pay more and more in cost to match, markets. And so I think just making the ROI calculation based on the assumption that you have labor easily and elastically available, I think it's kind of misguided, right? I think ultimately it comes down to, honestly, for us, it's performance. Can a system perform in production? So we have this performance-based assessment that we published a couple of years ago that we recommend, any of our prospects, whether they're deciding to go with us or not, that they use when looking at robotics vendors. And it takes into account basically not what the advertised kind of performance is, but rather what are they able to actually achieve in a factory acceptance test? Can they adjust? Can they get better? And so forth. And so, that's what we kind of focus on.
Well, we're just about out of time. Again, thank you, John and Anu, for your insights. And I definitely look forward to continuing our conversations. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Covariant and Körber Supply Chain. Remember to check out the free resources. Also, visit Robotics 24/7 for the latest developments in practical automation. Subscribe to our newsletters and register for our next free webinar on robotic piece picking with machine vision, which will be in December. Thank you again.
Thanks, Eugene.
Thank you.